Hey everybody, Tony Morrison here from GLAAD with the two and only Tegan and Sara. Pew, pew, pew. We have much to talk about. How are you?
Very well. Very excited to talk to you.
How has your year been? How are you? Sara, how is mom life? I want to hear all of it.
I think overall it's been a great year. It has happened so fast. I just this morning we're about to get our Christmas tree, and so I was looking at a picture of last year's Christmas tree because I was like, where did we have the tree? And I was like, how was this 1 year ago? Like, it's just so fast. And I blame some of it on just how busy we were, and then some of it on just like you said, being a mom, and just like, man, it's just like they say this thing about like the days are long, but the years are fast, with a kid. And it's really, really true. It's just like when you see time happening in a person who's like, one day he can't walk, then he can, one day he can't talk, now he can, it's just like, oh my God, it's just happening so fast. Crazy.
And Tegan, how's your year? How are you? What's the vibe on your end of the house?
My vibe is, I agree with Sarah, it went really quickly. It is weird having a kid in your orbit because time does change. You can really track time in a different way. It was a busy year. I mean, the last 2 years really, with our graphic novel and our TV show and a new album and touring for the first time in a handful of years, all the work we do at the foundation. It's like our days are so busy. Time just really, really flies. But I think as always, I mean, it just sounds so like a line you say when you're being interviewed, but I just feel like a lot of gratitude, very lucky to be working, lucky to be like working on things we love and enjoy, very grateful for all the people who continue to show up and listen to our band and pay to see us play. And like, it's just, honestly, we're like really fucking lucky.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think busy is the name of the game. I always feel like it's like, wait, there's more with the two of you.
Yeah.
And we're talking today because you've launched an Audible original together, but it's not an audiobook and it's way more than a podcast. Streaming now, everybody who's watching, Under My Control. I read that it's described as unvarnished and vulnerable.
I think vulnerable is code for that Sara, me. I cry through a number of moments in the in the interview. I think what makes this really unique is that we were part of the architectural design of the project. It wasn't just like an interview with a journalist where we're just like somebody's firing questions at us. We really sat down and asked ourselves, like, okay, if we have to cover our whole career, how do we want to do that? Like, what's interesting to the to the fan who already knows a lot of our big stories, as we would call them? Is there something deeper and more textured that we can reveal, that might shine light on the art, the art part of what we do, like the songwriting and the sort of production and the career part of what we do, and then also the relationship that we have, to each other and also to ourselves and our families. And so, there was a lot of thought that went into sort of what is the sort of thesis of this project, and then ultimately coming up with the sort of questions and the prompts that would allow us to tell these stories that I think are new and like I said, sort of textured in a different way than if we were just sitting down to have a conversation with a newspaper or whatever. Yeah. So it ended up, I think, yielding a result that is more vulnerable and emotional than maybe we normally would get in an interview.
Tegan, anything to add there on Under My Control and like the process in which you kind of attacked this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think Audible Words and Music is such an interesting project for artists. We listened to a bunch of them before we agreed to do it, and it's just so wonderful to hear artists tell their story in their own words, and to re-envision your music is such a privilege as an artist. I mean, we have artists like Taylor Swift who are now going back and re-recording their back catalogs, but like for most of us, the only place you get to play with your catalog is live. So it was really cool to go in the studio and take 8 of our songs from our catalog and re-record them and imagine them in a different way. And it was really moving to sit down and tell our story over, the days that we recorded. I was watching the Friends reunion last night. I'm like going through, I never really watched Friends, but I just listened to Matthew Perry's book, and my partner's really obsessed with Friends. So anyway, I was watching the reunion, and at the end, one of them is like, we'll never do this again. Like, we'll never get this, like, we can't celebrate this again in this way. Like it had been 20 years since it gone off the air, and they got together and they told the stories and they did whatever. And I had this thought where I was like, we can do it all the time. Sara and I could get together every year or every 10 years and we can retell our story, because it changes, it evolves, it's ongoing. We didn't stop, you know, there's no reunion. We're always working and making things together. And that means our story doesn't really have an end, at least yet. And so I think Under My Control and the Audible Words and Music sort of program, this like going in, reinventing your music, telling your story in your own words, putting it all together. It was a really creative experience for Sara and I. It allowed us to dive into parts of our career we haven't talked about publicly, but also to tell our story in our own words. You know, we as artists rely on the media, rely on press, rely on fans. We rely on everybody to sort of put the story together for us. But to have the opportunity to do it in our own words, it was honestly just like a really amazing experience. And I think fans of Tegan and Sara will really love it. But I also feel like we tell the story in a way that even if you have never heard our music, you could listen to it and hopefully find some like, you know, touchstones to connect to.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm not a lifer, but I'm pretty close. Okay, you've had me since sainthood, so for you to place me in your fan base there, that was your 6th studio album.
Yeah,
I'll consult with Google later, but
yeah, I think so.
You were talking about how you were going at this project and talking about your expansive career. What's really changed the most, do you think, in your music and in your creative process?
You know, I mean, I think there's probably a pretty clear delineation between the kind of first like 10 years, let's call it, of our career, where I think we were really in a position, like so many artists, where you're really dependent on investment from a fan base or a record label, you know, and investment, I mean like financial and otherwise. I just mean like you are building and you are always in a state of sort of like, I don't know, I guess like proving yourself and asking people for things, you know, you're always kind of going in going like, I hope they don't drop us, or I hope people buy tickets. Like there's like this sense of always kind of like just hustle, you know, just always hustling. And I think that sort of second part of our career was where we knew that we sort of had a base. We had we had respect from our investment partners, you know, our record label, our management company, our agents. We had a fan base that we really loved and they loved us. And so the second part of our career, I think, has been actually a little bit more about shifting our focus almost exclusively to, okay, how do we build on this? How do we surprise people? How do we have more fun with our image? How do we have more fun with, you know, collaborations and projects that live outside of our music, world? And so I think that first part of our career is so beloved by our fan base because it's, it really has that strife and that sort of like drama to it. And then I think the sort of second part of our career has really been more about like, you know, the sort of like creative and career sort of like, gains and surprises. And so, you know, I think we wanted to cover a lot of that in this project. And then also, you know, talk a little bit about like, well, then now what do we do? What does this sort of like third decade of our career look like for us?
And I think on that, Tegan, before you answer, I think what I was trying to ask was really the evolution of your sisterhood and creating together and how that process has changed and what's kept you going to keep doing this together and to keep giving the people what they want all these years.
Well, I think what's interesting about Tegan and Sara, the band, is that we don't always give people what they want initially. I think that's probably the challenge of longevity is balancing how much to give people what they want versus what you want. And I think for Sara and I, there's a selfishness to our project. We both pretty consistently come to the project with what we want, and we find compromise between the two of us, and then we give it to our audience. And even if it's not initially the pill they want to take, I think our passion for it, like we've fought it out prior to figure out what it is we want to do, what will keep us inspired and excited as siblings, as collaborators, as business partners, as creatives, that by the time it is out in the public, we're so convinced of it that you'll either, you know, fall in love with it instantly, or you'll eventually have to just accept that it's part of the Tegan and Sara canon because we loved it so much. So I think, you know, every time we go back and tell our story, you know, starting with our memoir a few years ago and the TV show, now our graphic novels, now this, you know, Under My Control project with Amazon, it's it's us revisiting, you know, how we work as collaborators and how unique it is because we are siblings. And it's not a traditional band. We can't quit each other. You know, we've certainly tried, but it's not going to happen. And so there's a certain connection, not only to each other, but to the music. And I think we're just always trying to figure out how to articulate that, you know, but it's definitely evolved from teenagers writing in our separate bedrooms and coming together to collaborate and share our guitar to now, you know, at times living thousands of miles apart from each other and running this huge business together and trying to figure out how to make something that both of us will feel inspired to go out and play again and again and again and feel proud of being attached to our legacy. So it's nonstop. You know, it's just a constant battle. I always tell people the only way you can really imagine what it's like to be in our band is to imagine being in a project with your sibling. And most people are like, nope, eject, absolutely not, evacuate, won't happen.
Right.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg for what it's like to be in Tegan. It's just a constant, you know, I can't think of the right word, but it's that.
Yeah.
But we're compulsive about wanting to be in the band. So it's like, and then also like, yes. So, you know, it's just that battle happening all the time.
I wanted to ask you too about the format of this project because it's so unique. You don't have to choose between listening to an impactful or personal conversation or jamming out. You can kind of do both. So is that part of what appealed to doing it in this way? Kind of take us behind the curtain in terms of how you work with the team to kind of stack all this, including how you're going to weave in the recordings that you did.
I mean, we did a lot of like pre-production legwork on the, you know, on the story part of it, you know, which I think actually was probably one of the most compelling parts of this project is that the balance of words to music was words to music. You know, it was like, we know the music is going to be important, but actually the story is going to be really significant. And I think as soon as we had really hammered out what we wanted the story to be, it made it easy to kind of put it together. And now I say easy, I wasn't the editor who had to take probably, I mean, Tegan, I don't know, what would you guess, like 16 hours or something like that we talked, and they had to turn it into like, you know, I'm sure the person who edited it was like, my God, do they ever stop talking? But I do think that, like, you know, there was a coherent through line, and it was just really about extracting those like really salient moments and making sure that they sort of were all there. But I think that feeling that you're talking about, that it's like, this isn't just like cobbled together like some songs and some stories. Like, this really was, we sat down and we talked about it in this like sequential order, and we really went through the eras and the stories, and we really worked in a linear fashion. And so what you're hearing at the beginning is the beginning, and what you're hearing at the end is the end. And I think that you feel that with the project. Spoiler
alert, you both made a surprise cameo on this current season of Canada's Drag Race. I screamed. How fun was that experience? Was that kind of a bucket list thing, or tell me a little bit about that? And would love to get into your takes, both of you, on what is happening with drag, especially in the US, and queer experiences overall. But let's start with Drag Race.
Yeah, I mean, when we got the email inviting us to come and be on the season premiere of Canada's Drag Race this year, we were over the moon, very excited, big fans. And also it intersected with a time where we were just seeing enormous pushback on drag, not just in the States, in Canada too. And just, you know, an unprecedented attack against trans people, you know, and I just feel celebrating queer culture and being a part of that celebration, building community, encouraging positivity when it comes to LGBTQ representation in the media. These are been, you know, incredibly important things to Sara and I our entire career, you know, starting from building community, then to encouraging positivity and being positive representation in the mainstream. These were goals and things that we've always done. So to get invited to do this at the exact same time that there's this pushback, it felt very on brand to Tegan and Sara. And so we happily agreed to go and do it, even though we're actually very nervous on television. We kind of hate being on camera. We don't know that much, like, specifically about fashion or drag. So I was like, are we equipped or qualified to do this? But everyone kept assuring us that everybody's amazing, and that we would be encouraged just to be ourselves. So no one on the planet was more excited than my mom. She is a massive RuPaul fan and loves Brooklyn and loves drag and loves the franchise, watches all of them. So she was ecstatic. And we went, and it was an amazing 2 days, and everybody was incredible, and we were thrilled to be on the season opener, but also to be a part of an episode where nobody had to go home. That felt also very on brand with Tegan and Sara. Nobody had to go home. No one got rejected. And everybody was right. We got to just be positive and you know, bestow our knowledge of the world on these awesome creatives and artists. And it was really wonderful. And, you know, when it comes to some of the negative stuff that happens to LGBTQ people still to this day, and the pushbacks and rollbacks and you know, anti-trans legislation, all of that stuff, it's horrific, it's awful. But I do zoom out and remind myself that a lot has changed in our lifetime. A lot is changing. I think that, as was proven recently with like the banning of LGBTQ books, that it was really just like 10 troll accounts or whatever that really, like, that it's a smaller number of, that doesn't change the fact that horrible things happen because of awful, horrific monster people like that. But it doesn't prove that the world doesn't love LGBTQ people or trans people. It only proves that there's a small, hateful group of people who are fucking horrific monsters. But like, I think generally speaking, there's just an amazing amount of love for queer and trans people out there. And I just hope our allies continue to fight for us. I hope, you know, media and you know, people with the opportunity to increase representation continue to finance and put their power and support behind positive LGBTQ representation, and you know, that organizations like GLAAD continue to work hard to make the LGBTQ experience a good one.
Thank you both so much for sitting down and talking with me about this new project. I cannot wait to get fully into it. As we wrap up, I know I was reading, Sara, you did an interview with Forbes a while back where they called the entirety of the Tegan and Sara experience a career renaissance. And I just wanted to say that out loud and affirm with you that I couldn't agree more with that assessment. So thank you for all that you have done and created for us, and appreciate you so much.
Hey, thank you. Thanks so much for talking with us today.
Thanks, Tony.
Under My Control, an Audible original, is streaming right now, you guys. So head over to Audible and listen in and jam out too.